Some prisoners die dreaming about the moment their feet will touch free ground, but not me. I was the only prisoner who didn't want to get out of prison. I know that you might be curious to know what the charge was that landed me up in prison, but I don't even have an answer for that, as I was put in prison without one. Even though I spent most of my life in prison, I didn't stay in there forever. My family and friends are all in prison, but that did not necessarily mean that I had to stay there as well. It took a lot of guts for me to get out of prison, but going back in, without a doubt, even harder to do. My mom was only 16 when she went to prison, a mere single moment that turned her life upside down. All her dreams vanished into thin air when she pointed a gun at a burglar that broke into her house to scare him off. It was her first time to ever hold a gun, and she didn't know how to use it. All she knew was that her mom had put the gun in her hands. She was terrified and trembling as the burglar took her money and attempted to escape through the window right in front of her. The money that the burglar tried to steal was all she had, and she was keeping it for the baby that was growing inside her, which was the reason for her mom's rage in the first place. On the one hand, there was a voice that spoke to her in the last moment before she pulled the trigger. It told her, "Don't do it, it's wrong." And then there was my grandmother's voice saying, "Do it!" And the voice of the burglar on the other end of the barrel begging her, "Don't do it." It was then that my grandmother screamed at her, telling her that she was a useless coward. She no longer heard anything, neither the voice of the burglar nor the voice of her mom, not even the voice coming from within her. All that she heard was the sound of the gunshot that still rings loud in her ears even to this day. Nobody in the police station believed her when she told them that she didn't mean to do it, and all that she remembers was hearing all those voices, and then the image of the burglar lying in a pool of his own blood. The last words that my mom heard from her mom were, "You will always be a bad girl." And that was it. She was charged with murder, and she was sentenced to 35 years in prison. If she was lucky, she would get out of prison by the time she turned 40. But my mom isn't very lucky. You might be thinking, how could a 16-year-old girl be imprisoned while she was still a minor? So let me explain. There are 2 states that allow the imprisonment of those who are between 16 and 17 years of age, as they consider them to be adults. And as if that wasn't already bad enough, she also had to deal with having a mean mom, and at the same time, being 4 months pregnant. She had lived her whole life in a hostile environment, and now it looked like she would die in one too. Even if the place she was in was different, it wouldn't matter. There are bad people everywhere, whether inside or outside of prison. And as for me, well, my luck wasn't much better than my mom's was. I was in her womb throughout all of this. On her first day in prison, she screamed all day and night as she desperately needed some vitamins for her baby. She was extremely exhausted and afraid that her baby would die. Her baby was the only thing that was left for her. She had to scream at the top of her lungs over and over again until she no longer could, for them to finally ask her what she wanted. She screamed because she was alone, screamed because she was miserable, screamed because her dark thoughts had taken over her, screamed because of hunger, exhaustion, and pain. She screamed and screamed nonstop. And because she spent the last 5 months of her pregnancy screaming, no one knew that while it was just her 5th month in prison, it was actually her 9th month of pregnancy, and she was screaming because the time had come. Nobody knew that the time had come for her to give birth until I joined her in her screams when I was finally born. It didn't matter so much, though. The only difference was that the supervisor upsized her meals so that it would be enough for the 2 of us, and that the other prisoners looked out for Mom a bit more after she'd given birth. Although I don't have any memory of those tough days, I can honestly say that my mom's face was the only thing that kept me alive in the absence of the proper health care that a newborn like me needed. Prison was originally designed to break a person mentally, emotionally, and physically. My mom was pushed to the verge of madness while she was still a kid, but the only thing that kept whatever was left of her sanity intact was me. When I started to learn to talk, I learned the word grandmother from my mom. She used to tell me stories about my grandmother, who never visited us. My mom knew that I was the only family she had left, but I couldn't help thinking that somewhere behind the walls of the prison, I had a grandmother. It's fair to say that even though there was no blood relationship between me and the women and girls who were imprisoned with my mom, they were still like family to me. None of the guards cared about me, except one. Her name was Zoya. She had Russian roots and she used to bring me clothes and diapers. She was the one who gave me my name Vera, which means hope in Russian. She even taught me how to read and write when I turned 6, wanting to prepare me for the day on which I'd get out of prison to see a world I had no clue about. One day after she'd spent almost a whole day trying to convince me to sit and learn, I asked her, "Why would I learn to read and write if there's nothing for me to read or write about around here?" She answered, "Who said that there's nothing to read? There are millions of books out there that are full of stories and information about everything in the world." Then I was curious, so I asked, "And how can I get these books?" She said, "Tomorrow I will bring you some comic books." The next day, I waited by the cell gate holding onto the bars waiting for Zoya to come, but she never came. I sat day after day in the same spot waiting for her to show up, but she never did. Finally, I asked one of the guards who'd taken her place, and she told me that Zoya wasn't coming back. Eventually, the hope I'd had about getting the books started to fade, but that was far from the worst thing that was about to happen to me. My mom started treating me differently. She was moody all the time, and I could hear her crying all night. She no longer liked talking to me or sitting next to me while we ate. Can you imagine what it's like to be avoided by the only person you have in the whole world? I endured weeks and months of neglect. I didn't know what to do. One day I couldn't take it anymore. I was so mad about the way my relationship with my mom had changed. A woman who was a few years younger than my mom approached me and asked me to move away from the corner in which I was sitting because she wanted to sit in it. I refused, so she pushed me. I fell on the floor and cut my hand. I learned in prison that everyone wants to be the tough guy, so they won't fall victim to someone else who's stronger. Everyone struts around to show how tough they are, but I didn't need to prove how tough I was to anyone. Everyone treated me like a child, but suddenly they had all stopped doing that, and I didn't understand why. I couldn't just sit back and not do anything about what that woman had done to me, so I stood up, dusted myself off, and pushed her back. But she was so big. The rest of the prisoners surrounded us and started to chant, "Fight, fight, fight!" But the fight was over before it had even begun. Some prison guards approached us to break up the fight. One of them grabbed me by the hand and took me to the office of the chief prison warden. While we were on our way, and without any warning, she punched me in the chest. She treated me exactly like one of those prisoners. That punch somehow took my breath away, but I didn't fight back, as a prisoner's card always loses to the guard's card. I only looked at her with great anger and frustration. I looked around everywhere trying to find my mom, but I couldn't find her. Suddenly, my anger turned into gut-wrenching sobs. That guard saw the anger and misery burning in my eyes, so she looked at me and said, "Your eyes will get you in a lot of trouble. You have to understand that there's no place for you here, but if you ever want to have a chance of surviving outside these walls, you have to first survive inside. Life outside isn't that different from life in here." She extended her hand to shake mine, which in the prison world meant that she respected me. I went into the office of the chief prison warden. I saw a pile of papers in front of him. Photos of me and my mom were on top of it. I wasn't sat in front of him because of the fight. Instead, he was about to tell me the news that would change my entire life for the worse. "You are getting out of jail," he told me in a cold voice. He then said, "There's a family that is going to adopt you. You will go to school, and your life here will be a thing of the past." My life in that place would not only be a thing of the past, it would be over. Forever! The procedures were faster than I expected them to be. Within 2 hours, I had my stuff packed and I was waiting in front of the cell for the family that was adopting me. I sat there waiting for the unknown. Who was this family, and where were they taking me? And as for my mom, well, she didn't even show up to say goodbye. Why, though? A tall man wearing a suit and a short, fat woman who was wearing a colorful dress arrived. The way they looked was strange to me. Why is the lady wearing gloves? I asked myself. The weather wasn't cold. Let's just say that our first meeting was okay, but not exactly comforting. I didn't want to go with them, but I had no other choice. First, I'd been abandoned by Zoya, and then by my own mom. Prisons are supposed to rehabilitate the prisoners to help them give up on the emotions of anger and help them to start over with a new life. However, prison only taught me how to stay in a corner that was full of rage, desperation, and frustration. As a 7-year-old girl who had never had the chance to explore other sides of my personality, it was hard at first for me to get along with Mr. and Mrs. Thompson who'd adopted me. They were suspiciously calm. I felt like they were plotting something. But to my surprise, it turned out that being calm was the normal state of a human being and not the other way around, and that I was the one who was constantly in an abnormal state. After a while, I began to like them, but absolutely nothing was going to replace the love I had in my heart for my mom. We tried over and over again to visit my mom in prison, but she refused to see us every time we went to visit her. I came back from those visiting attempts every time with 1,000 questions in my mind. The only answer that Mrs. Thompson had for me was, "When you grow up, you will understand." I soon went to school, and guess what? There were a lot of books. I bought some of them for my classes, and there were so many in the library. But despite how happy I was about all these books that I could read, I felt sad for Zoya and my mom. I managed to make friends with some kids my own age, and I was very diligent at school. Everyone liked me, and I started to enjoy life outside the walls of prison. I started to spend most of my time at the library, but I always wished that my mom could be there too.
I know everyone thinks that their family is weird, but let me tell you about all the crazy stuff that happened to me last year. Then you'll realize that your family is probably pretty normal. I'm Ellie, and I'm just a regular 17-year-old girl. I live with my mom, Carol. My dad died when I was young, so it's always just been my mom and we're really close. One day, about a year ago, I needed to find some old clothes for a school project. I was studying textiles and needed some old clothes to upcycle. My mom was out, so I couldn't ask her for any, but I thought there might be some in the attic. I hadn't been up there before, and I was surprised how much stuff there was. I found lots of boxes of her old stuff. As I was looking, I found some old photo albums. I opened one and had a look through. It was pictures of Mom when she was young, only a bit older than me. It was so cool to see these pictures. I'd never seen them before, and Mom never spoke about life before I was born. I wondered why she kept the album in the attic instead of the house. Then I saw some pictures of when she was pregnant. It was weird. She looked much younger in the pictures than I thought she would be. She was 41 when she had me, yet here she only looked about 20. Then I realized she must have had a baby many years before she had me. I turned the page and saw a picture of her holding a baby dressed in pink, but it wasn't me. There were pictures of this baby growing up, and as a child, I had an older sister. By now, I had forgotten all about finding old clothes. I took the photo albums out from the attic and carried on looking through them. When Mom came home, I confronted her with the albums. When she saw them, she looked so shocked. She started shouting at me for snooping through her things. I asked her if she had a baby before me, and she said yes. Before I was born, she had a girl called Melanie, who was her first child. She lived here until she was 18. Then Melanie did something terrible and ran away from home. That was the last time Mom had seen her. Mom grounded me for going through her things and said she would never talk about Melanie again. But I couldn't believe I had a big sister, and Mom had never told me. I was so angry at my mom that I didn't talk to her for ages. I kept thinking about what Melanie could have done to make her run away. Maybe she was an arsonist or shoplifter, but whatever it was, I couldn't believe it was so bad that Mom had never told me that she existed. I had a right to know. A few days later, Mom was cooking dinner, and I mustered up the courage to ask her more about my sister. But when I mentioned her, Mom got so angry she knocked the pan of spaghetti all over the floor. She shouted at me to go away and to stop asking questions. I ran to my room and locked myself in. I realized that if I wanted to find Melanie, then I would have to do it myself. I went onto the computer and searched for Melanie Harding. I found loads of Facebook profiles of people with that name. I scrolled through the pictures looking for the right one. Then I saw her. She had blonde hair and the same bluey gray eyes that both Mom and I have. It was her. It took me a while, but I managed to drum up the courage to send her a message. Hey, my name is Ellie. I'm looking for a Melanie that I'm related to. I wondered if that is you. I would like to get in touch. I pressed send. The next day, I kept checking my phone to see if she had seen it. It said that she had read the message, but she didn't respond. I felt so weird. Why wouldn't she want to get in touch with me? Then late the next night, I got a message back. Hi, yes, I'm that Melanie. I'm sorry I've never been in touch. I just thought it would be easier for everyone that way. Anyway, I hope you are well and happy. M. I was so pleased that she responded. Over the next few weeks, we sent messages back and forth, talking about each other's lives. She told me that she worked as a receptionist at a doctor's office in the next town. She lived with her boyfriend, Mike, and 2 cats. We had loads in common. We both loved strawberry ice cream and Disney films, and we both hated spiders. I didn't talk to her about our mom or ask why she left, with the conversation being so good. I didn't want to rush into anything serious, even though I was dying to know. Then one day, Mom found out. I had left my phone downstairs in the kitchen, and Mom had seen a message from Melanie pop up on my phone. She shouted at me for going behind her back and threatened to ground me. But I shouted back and told her that she shouldn't have lied to me and that she was a terrible mom. I grabbed my bag and stormed out of the house. I knew where I had to go. I wanted to find Melanie, so I caught a bus to the next town to find her. I didn't know the name of the doctor she worked for, so I just went from one office to another asking about Melanie. Then I walked into one and saw a woman on the phone. She looked like an older version of me. It was her. I stood in a corner and waved to her. I thought that she would be pleased to see me, but when she realized who I was, she looked scared. When she got off the phone, she walked up to me and asked me what I was doing at her workplace. I told her that I wanted to surprise her. She told her colleagues that she was taking a break, and she took me to a coffee shop down the road. When she sat down, she told me that I shouldn't have come looking for her. I felt so crushed. I couldn't believe that I had found out I had a sister, only for her not to want anything to do with me. I asked her why she left, and she said it was because she knew that Carol would be a much better mom than she could have been. I wasn't expecting her to say that. I stood up, knocking my chair over. People in the cafe turned and looked at what was going on, but I didn't care. Wait, I don't understand. Does this mean you're actually my mom? I shouted out. Oh my God, what do you mean? Melanie said. She tried to get me to sit down so she could explain. I don't think she wanted to make a scene, but I didn't care. I shouted at her to answer my question. Yes, she said. I'm your real mom. I don't get it. I shouted back at her. My mom's Carol. Melanie shook her head and told me the truth. Carol is actually her mom, not mine. I couldn't believe it. The woman I thought was my mom all my life was in fact my grandma? I don't believe you. I screamed as I ran out of the cafe crying. I ignored Melanie running after me. I never wanted to see her again. I caught the bus home in tears. Why would Melanie say such a horrible lie? When I got home, I saw a police car outside of my house. Oh my gosh! While I was out, something had happened to my mom. The front door was open, and I ran inside to see a policeman in the lounge, and my mom sat on the sofa crying. I ran in and gave her the biggest hug and asked her what was wrong. She told me that she was so worried about me running away, she had called the police. Oh, when the police realized everything was okay, they left. Mom and I had a long talk that evening. I told her what Melanie told me, hoping Mom would tell me it was all a lie. But she shook her head and cried. She said, I was now old enough to learn the truth about our family. She told me that when Melanie was a teenager, she had got involved with the wrong people and had got addicted to drugs. She had even stolen money from her. She moved in with her friends, and Mom hardly ever saw her. Couldn't help her. Then one day, Melanie turned up on the doorstep with me. I was only a few days old. Melanie said she wouldn't cope with me, so she left her with Mom. That was the last time Mom saw Melanie. I couldn't believe Mom lied to me. I ran upstairs and locked myself in my room. I didn't know who I was anymore. I refused to speak to Mom, and I blocked Melanie on Facebook so she could never contact me again. However, I couldn't go on with my life like that. I had tons of questions that needed to be answered. The more that passed, the more I felt the need to talk to her. Eventually, I unblocked Melanie and got back in contact with her. I told her I really want to know about her past and why she's never tried to contact me through all these years. But for a start, it's enough that we are open to get to know each other and see where it goes. That was a few months ago. I was finally able to forgive Mom for lying to me for all these years. I realized that even though my birth mom couldn't be a good mom to me, my grandma was the best mom anyone could ever wish for. There was no way I would still be mad at her. My relationship with my birth mom is still developing. She apologized for how harsh she was to me in the past, and she promised me that she hasn't taken drugs for a long time. Letting her in my life wasn't easy, but I can't say that I'm not happy that I met her. Not only that, but my mom has let her in too, and they're making up for the time they lost together. I could see from the way she behaves that she regrets the past, and she's trying hard to regain our trust. Today, I am sharing this story with both of their support as they're sitting beside me. I love them both, and I understand that circumstances were not in their favor in the past. If anything, I try to stay positive and think of my story as the girl who gained two moms in her life.